This is part 3 of section 2.6. We have just this one more problem, although we're doing multiple things with it. The first thing we want to do is we want to find f composed with g of x and then state the domain. And then we're going to find g of f of, we're going to plug in a number this time, 0.5. Okay. Now the first thing we have to worry about is f composed with g of x, and we're going to have to state the domain, which means we need to look at the pieces here. I have x squared plus 1. I have no denominators, no radicals. I don't have anything to worry about here. So the domain of just f is going to be negative infinity to positive infinity. That one's completely good. Okay. But here, g of x is equal to the square root of 2 minus x, and we're not allowed to take the square root of a negative number. So that means that whatever 2 minus x is, it needs to be bigger than or equal to 0, because we're allowed to take the square root of 0, so it can equal it. But just whatever this is, it needs to be overall bigger than 0 once we plug in our x. So let's solve this by adding x to both sides, and I have 2 is greater than or equal to x. So what does this mean? My x values need to be smaller than 2 in order to make this possible. So that means I start off at negative infinity and it goes up to 2. Remember, infinities always get parentheses. And since we are allowed to equal 0 right here, because this is not in a denominator and we are allowed to take the square root of 0, this has a bracket. Okay, so now let's find f of g of x. So this is f of the square root of 2 minus x. Okay, now remember, when we're finding domain, we have to consider the domain of the piece we're plugging in. So that means this is a requirement for this answer, even if our apparent issue disappears. Okay, so now let's take this 2 minus, the square root of 2 minus x and plug it in right here. So this is the square root of 2 minus x squared plus 1. Well, what happens when you square a square root? Well, when you square a square root, you get what's underneath. You get the radicand. So this is simply 2 minus x plus 1, which is 3 minus x. And if you just look at this, there are no more issues. I don't have a denominator. I don't have a radical anymore. Okay, so my problems apparently went away, but of course they did not. My domain, because I had to consider the part that we plugged in, my domain is from negative infinity up to 2 with a bracket. Okay, so now let's go the other way. G of f of 0.5. There are two ways you can do this. You can find g composed with f of x, do the problem like this, and then plug in 0.5 at the end and you'll get your answer. That works. Or you can plug in 0.5 first. Let's write this out just by using the definition. G composed with f of 0.5 is the same thing as g of f of 0.5, which tells me I can plug in 0.5 in here. So this is g of 0.5 squared plus 1. 0.5 squared is, well, this is 1/2. 1/2 squared is 1/4. So 1/4 plus 1 is 5/4. So I have g of 5/4. Okay, or you can think of it as g of 1.25. Same thing. Okay, so now let's take 1.25 and plug it in here. So this is going to be equal to the square root of 2 minus 1.25, which is the square root of 0.75, which I'm going to rewrite as a fraction. Okay, and we know the property that says you can take the square root of the top over the square root of the bottom, which is 2. So the square root of 3 over 2, this is the answer they are most likely going to want. It is potentially possible that they ask you for a decimal approximation, and that's where you would just plug it into your calculator and round it off properly. But almost certainly they're going to ask you for the exact answer and then maybe ask you for the approximation, not the approximation directly.